A bipartisan group of clerks and recorders from Colorado is now calling out Governor Polis for staying silent regarding a request from President Trump.
The president wants former Mesa County Clerk Tina Peters moved from state to federal custody, where she could be pardoned. Peters was convicted on 7 counts of election interference in 2022.
Okay, so this is absolutely wild, and it shows just how desperate Trump is getting. The Justice Department, Trump's Justice Department, is now trying to take custody of Tina Peters from Colorado State Prison. Like they're literally trying to grab her from state custody and put her under federal control. And the whole purpose is so Trump can release her. Because Trump has been publicly demanding that his DOJ free Peters, he's been calling her a political prisoner. He's been making her a cause célèbre for the MAGA movement. And now his Justice Department is taking active steps to get her out of prison, even though she was convicted by a jury in state court for actual crimes she actually committed. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. Alright, let's get back to the video.
President Trump posted over the weekend on Truth Social, "Free Tina Peters," for attempting to expose voter fraud and rigged 2020 presidential election. Because Peters is serving her 9-year sentence in state custody, it's up to Governor Polis to either release her into federal custody or keep her here in Colorado, where she would not be eligible for a presidential pardon. A bipartisan group of county clerks is asking for Polis to not release Peters. But the group says they haven't heard from him.
The silence, the non-communication, the non-response to the 64 clerk and recorders elected by the people of this state and 64 different counties have yet to receive a response. It should be a no-brainer.
The clerks say they have asked for a meeting with the governor, but have not received an answer. I asked them if they're nervous about what Polis might say and whether he would release her to federal custody after all.
When he didn't provide a response late last week, it made us very nervous that he's taking it seriously.
Let me break down what's happening, because this is genuinely shocking. Back in November, the Federal Bureau of Prisons sent a letter to Colorado, and the letter requested that Colorado transfer custody of Tina Peters from state prison to federal custody. That's the federal government asking a state to hand over a prisoner who was convicted under state law in state court. And why would they do that? Because once Peters is in federal custody, Trump's Justice Department can release her. They can say, "We reviewed the case and we're letting her go." Colorado can't do anything about it because they don't have custody anymore. It's a way for Trump to free someone who's serving a state prison sentence. Now this plan hit a snag on December 8th when a federal judge refused to release Peters. She had filed a request to be let out while her appeals continue, and the judge said no, you're staying in prison. But that doesn't stop the custody transfer plan, because the DOJ can still try to get custody from Colorado, and once they have custody, they might try other legal maneuvers to get her released. This isn't over. Trump's Justice Department is still actively working to free Tina Peters. And let's be crystal clear about what this means. This is the President of the United States using federal law enforcement to intervene in a state criminal conviction. Peters was prosecuted by Colorado, indicted by a Colorado grand jury, convicted by a Colorado jury, sentenced by a Colorado judge. The federal government had nothing to do with her case, but now Trump's DOJ is trying to override all of that. They're trying to take custody of a state prisoner so they can release her because Trump wants her freed. That's an abuse of federal power. That's the president interfering with state justice systems to benefit a political ally. And Trump hasn't been subtle about this. Back in May 2025, Trump posted on social media ordering the Justice Department to take all necessary action to help secure the release of Tina Peters. He called her a political prisoner. He made it clear he personally wants her freed. And now the DOJ, which is supposed to be independent from presidential political demands, is doing exactly what Trump ordered. They're taking all necessary action, including trying to seize custody from Colorado so they can release her. That's the Justice Department acting as Trump's personal law firm and political operation, rather than as an independent enforcement agency. Now, you might remember Tina Peters from earlier videos. She's the former Mesa County, Colorado clerk who was convicted of facilitating an unauthorized breach of election systems. She was spreading conspiracy theories about the 2020 election. She helped people access secure voting equipment. She shared confidential election data, and she got caught and prosecuted and convicted. A jury found her guilty of multiple felonies, and she's now serving a 9-year state prison sentence. That's not political persecution. That's accountability for crimes. But Trump sees Peters as a hero, a martyr who was trying to expose election fraud and got punished for it, and Trump has made freeing her a personal priority. He's been publicly demanding her release for months, and now his Justice Department is taking unprecedented steps to make it happen. They're using federal power to try to overturn a state conviction, and that should alarm everyone regardless of your politics. Because if the president can use the Justice Department to free allies who were convicted of crimes in state court, then state justice systems become meaningless. Presidents can just override any state conviction they don't like. And here's what makes this even more outrageous. Trump spent years accusing Democrats of weaponizing the Justice Department. He said Obama weaponized it. He said Biden weaponized it. He claimed they were using federal law enforcement as a political tool to go after their enemies. And now Trump is literally doing exactly that. He's using the DOJ as a political tool, not to prosecute enemies, but to free allies. He's openly ordering the Justice Department to help a specific person he's decided should be freed, and the DOJ is complying. That's weaponization. That's politicization. That's exactly what Trump accused his predecessors of doing. So over the next 20 minutes, we're going to break down exactly what the DOJ is trying to do with this custody transfer. We're going to look at the legal and constitutional problems with the federal government interfering in state prosecutions. We're going to talk about why Trump is so desperate to free Tina Peters specifically, and we're going to figure out what it means when the Justice Department becomes the president's personal fixer for rescuing convicted criminals who happen to be political allies, because this is corruption. This is abuse of power, and it's happening right out in the open. Let's get into it. Alright, so let's dig into the details of what the Justice Department is trying to do and why this custody transfer scheme is so problematic, because this isn't normal, this isn't how federal-state relations are supposed to work, and it raises huge questions about the rule of law and presidential abuse of power. So let's start with the custody transfer request. In November 2025, the Federal Bureau of Prisons, which is part of the Justice Department, sent a letter to Colorado state authorities, and the letter requested that Colorado transfer custody of Tina Peters from state prison to federal custody. Now, normally custody transfers happen when there's a legitimate federal interest. Maybe someone convicted in state court also has federal charges pending. Or maybe federal authorities need to interview a state prisoner about federal crimes. There are legitimate reasons for custody transfers. But in Peters' case, there's no obvious legitimate reason. She doesn't have federal charges. She's not a federal witness. The only reason for the transfer is so Trump's DOJ can release her. And Colorado officials have to be looking at this request, thinking what the hell, because they prosecuted Peters. They spent time and resources investigating her crimes. They brought her to trial. A jury convicted her, and now the federal government wants to take her and potentially let her go? That completely undermines state authority. It tells Colorado prosecutors that even if you successfully convict someone, the federal government can step in and undo your work if the president likes the defendant. That's not federalism. That's federal overreach. That's the president using federal power to interfere with state criminal justice. Now, the legal mechanism here is complicated. The federal government can request custody transfers, but states don't have to comply. Colorado could say no. She's serving a state sentence for state crimes, and we're keeping her. But there might be ways for the feds to compel the transfer. They could go to court and argue there's a federal interest that requires custody. They could use intergovernmental agreements. They could apply political pressure. And Trump's DOJ is probably exploring all of those options right now, because Trump has personally demanded Peters be freed. And that's the key point. This isn't the Justice Department acting on its own legal judgment. This is the Justice Department acting because the president told them to. Trump posted on social media in May, ordering the DOJ to take all necessary action to secure Peters' release. That's a direct presidential command, and the DOJ is following that command, even though it means interfering with a state conviction. That's not how the Justice Department is supposed to work. The DOJ is supposed to be independent. It's supposed to make decisions based on law, not based on what the president wants politically. But Trump has completely destroyed that independence. He's turned the DOJ into his personal legal operation. Now let's talk about the judge's decision on December 8th, because that's important context. Peters filed a habeas petition in federal court, asking to be released while her appeals continue. She argued her imprisonment violates her constitutional rights, but the federal judge said no. The judge found no legal basis to release her. Her conviction was legitimate. Her sentence is lawful, and she's staying in prison. That ruling should have been the end of it. Federal court looked at her case and said she belongs in prison. But Trump's DOJ isn't giving up. They're still trying the custody transfer route, because even though a judge said Peters should stay locked up, Trump wants her freed. So the DOJ keeps looking for workarounds. And this connects to Trump's broader pattern of trying to rescue loyalists who face legal consequences. We've seen this before. Trump pardoned allies convicted of federal crimes in his first term. He commuted Roger Stone's sentence. He pardoned Michael Flynn. He pardoned Paul Manafort. He's promised to pardon January 6th defendants. And now he's trying to free Tina Peters, even though she's in state prison, which makes it harder. The message is clear. If you're loyal to Trump and you get convicted, Trump will try to get you out. That creates a terrible incentive structure. It encourages people to break the law in service of Trump's goals because they think Trump will rescue them if they get caught. And Peters is particularly important to Trump because she's an election denier. She was spreading Trump's lies about the 2020 election. She was trying to prove fraud, even though there was no fraud, and she broke the law doing it. So Trump sees her as a martyr for the cause, someone who sacrificed her freedom to fight for election integrity, as Trump defines it. And freeing her sends a message to other election deniers. I've got your back. You can violate election security laws, trying to prove my lies, and I'll try to get you out if you get convicted. That's incredibly dangerous for election security and rule of law. Now let's talk about the constitutional problems with what Trump's doing. Because federalism matters, the Constitution divides power between federal and state governments. States have their own criminal justice systems. They prosecute crimes under state law in state courts. And the federal government isn't supposed to interfere with that unless there's a compelling federal interest. But Trump's trying to interfere purely for political reasons. He doesn't like that Colorado convicted Peters, so he's using federal power to try to override Colorado's justice system. That's not a legitimate exercise of federal authority, that's abuse of power. And this raises separation of powers issues too, because the Justice Department is part of the executive branch, but it's supposed to exercise prosecutorial discretion independently from presidential politics. The president shouldn't be telling the DOJ who to prosecute or who to release. That independence is critical for rule of law, but Trump has destroyed it. He openly orders the DOJ to take actions that benefit him politically, and the DOJ complies. That turns the Justice Department into a political weapon rather than an independent law enforcement agency. Legal experts and democracy advocates are sounding alarms about this. They're calling it an unusual and inappropriate federal intervention in a state conviction. They're saying Trump is pressuring the DOJ to benefit a political ally. They're warning that this sets a terrible precedent where presidents can use federal power to rescue anyone they like from state prosecutions. And they're right, because if Trump gets away with this, every future president will try similar things. Red state governors will ask friendly presidents to rescue their allies from blue state convictions. Blue state governors will ask friendly presidents to rescue their allies from red state convictions. The whole system of state criminal justice breaks down if the president can just override state convictions for political reasons. And think about the message this sends. Trump is telling prosecutors and judges in states that even if you successfully convict someone, I can undo your work if I want to. That undermines faith in justice systems. It tells people that law doesn't matter if you have political connections. That convictions can be overturned, not through legal appeals, but through presidential interference. That's corruption. That's exactly the kind of thing that happens in authoritarian countries, where the leader is above the law and can protect allies from legal consequences. Now Trump's defenders are going to argue that Peters is being treated unfairly, that she was prosecuted for political reasons because she questioned the election, that Colorado went after her to punish election denialism, and they'll frame Trump's intervention as correcting an injustice. But that's not what happened. Peters was prosecuted because she facilitated unauthorized access to election systems. She broke specific laws about election security. A grand jury indicted her. A jury convicted her. She had lawyers. She had a trial. She got due process. And the jury found her guilty. That's justice working. It's not political persecution. But Trump can't accept that. To Trump, anyone who supported his election lies and faced legal consequences is a victim. Anyone who gets prosecuted for crimes committed in service of Trump's agenda is a political prisoner. And Trump will use every tool of government to try to rescue them. That's authoritarian thinking. That's the mindset of a leader who sees law as an obstacle to overcome rather than as a constraint to respect, and it's incredibly dangerous. So we've got the Justice Department trying to seize custody of a state prisoner so they can release her because the president personally wants her freed. We've got federal interference in state criminal justice for purely political reasons. We've got the DOJ acting as Trump's personal fixer rather than as an independent law enforcement agency. And we've got Trump openly destroying the norms and rules that are supposed to separate presidential power from prosecutorial decisions. This is what corruption looks like, and it's happening in plain sight. Okay, so let's break down what this all means and where it goes from here. Because Trump's attempt to free Tina Peters isn't just about one person. It's about presidential power, DOJ independence, federalism, and the rule of law. And how this plays out matters enormously. Here's point 1. This is a direct attack on state sovereignty and federalism. The Constitution gives states substantial autonomy to run their own criminal justice systems. States define crimes under state law. They prosecute those crimes in state courts. They imprison people convicted of state crimes in state prisons, and the federal government isn't supposed to interfere with that process, except in extraordinary circumstances. But Trump is trying to interfere for purely political reasons. He wants to free someone Colorado convicted because that person is his political ally. That's not an extraordinary circumstance that justifies federal intervention. That's the president abusing federal power to override state justice. And if Trump succeeds, if he manages to get Peters released through this custody transfer scheme, it sets a precedent that destroys state criminal justice autonomy, because then every president can do the same thing. Democrat presidents can free left-wing activists convicted in red states. Republican presidents can free right-wing activists convicted in blue states. State prosecutions become meaningless if the president can just override them, and that's terrible for federalism and for rule of law. States need to be able to enforce their laws without fear of federal interference. That's basic constitutional structure, and Trump is demolishing it. Point 2. This shows the complete politicization of the Justice Department under Trump. The DOJ is supposed to be independent from presidential politics. Yes, the president appoints the Attorney General, but once appointed, the Attorney General and the DOJ are supposed to make decisions based on law, not based on what's politically convenient for the president. That's why there are norms against presidents contacting the DOJ about specific cases. That's why previous Attorneys General have resigned rather than do things presidents wanted that were legally questionable. The independence of the DOJ is crucial for rule of law. But Trump has destroyed that independence. He openly orders the DOJ to do things. He posts on social media, commanding them to free specific people, and the DOJ complies. They don't push back. They don't maintain independence. They act as Trump's political enforcers. That's not how the Justice Department is supposed to work. That's how Justice Departments work in authoritarian countries, where they exist to serve the leader rather than to enforce the law impartially. And once you politicize the DOJ, you can't easily undo it, because future presidents will say, well, Trump did it, so why can't I? The norms are broken, the independence is gone, and you end up in a situation where the Justice Department is just another political tool that each administration uses against its enemies and for its friends. That's a disaster for justice and accountability. Point 3. Trump's desperation to free Peters reveals his priorities and his mindset. Because why is Trump so personally invested in getting this one person out of prison? It's not like Peters is a close personal friend. It's not like she has information that could help or hurt Trump. The reason Trump cares is purely symbolic. Peters is an election denier who broke the law, trying to prove Trump's lies about election fraud, and Trump wants to reward that loyalty. He wants to show other potential supporters that if you break the law for Trump, he'll try to get you out. That's an incredibly dangerous incentive structure because it encourages lawlessness. If people think they can commit crimes in service of Trump's political goals and Trump will rescue them, they're more likely to break the law. We saw this with January 6th. People believed Trump's lies. They committed violence based on those lies, and now Trump is promising to pardon them. That's Trump encouraging people to break the law for him. And the Peters case is the same dynamic. Trump is encouraging election deniers to violate election laws because he'll try to free them if they get caught. And this connects to Trump's broader election denial project, because Trump is still claiming the 2020 election was stolen, even though that's completely false. He's still spreading conspiracy theories. He's still undermining faith in elections. And people like Peters, people who broke the law trying to prove those false claims, Trump sees them as heroes, as patriots who were punished for telling the truth. And by trying to free Peters, Trump is validating all of that. He's saying, yes, the election was stolen. Yes, Peters was right to do what she did. And yes, the prosecution was political persecution. That's dangerous for democracy because it encourages more people to violate election laws, to interfere with election systems, to undermine election security, all in service of Trump's lies. Now let's talk about what happens next. Colorado could refuse to transfer custody. They could say, no, she's our prisoner serving our sentence, and we're keeping her. And that would force Trump's DOJ to go to court to try to compel the transfer, which would create a legal fight that might not go Trump's way. Judges might say the federal government has no legitimate interest that justifies taking custody, that this is purely political interference, and they might block it. So Colorado has power here if they choose to use it. But there's political risk for Colorado too, because if they fight this, Trump is going to attack them. He's going to call Colorado corrupt. He's going to claim they're holding a political prisoner, and Trump's base is going to believe him. So Colorado officials have to decide, do we stand up for our state's sovereignty and our justice system, even though it brings political attacks, or do we cave and hand Peters over to avoid the fight? That's a tough call, and we're going to see which way Colorado goes. The political implications of this for 2026 are really interesting because Trump freeing Peters, or trying to free her, plays well with his base. They see Peters as a martyr. They think she was prosecuted for political reasons. And Trump fighting to free her makes him look like he's standing up for the little guy against corrupt state prosecutors. That narrative works with MAGA voters, but it probably doesn't work with moderates and independents who see this as Trump abusing power to benefit an ally who broke the law. So Trump is making a calculation that energizing his base is worth alienating persuadable voters, and that might be right for his political strategy, but it's terrible for democracy and rule of law. So where does this leave us? Trump's Justice Department is trying to seize custody of Tina Peters from Colorado so they can release her. They're doing this because Trump personally ordered them to. A federal judge already said Peters should stay in prison, but Trump's not giving up. And this whole situation reveals the corruption of Trump's Justice Department, the breakdown of federalism, and Trump's willingness to abuse power to reward political allies. Colorado needs to stand firm and refuse the custody transfer. Congress needs to investigate this abuse of DOJ authority. And voters need to understand that this is what authoritarianism looks like, the president using federal law enforcement as his personal fixer to rescue convicted criminals he likes. This matters. Pay attention. Because what Trump is doing here is a threat to the rule of law and state sovereignty, and if we let him get away with it, the damage will be permanent.